As promised, we are now joined by Grady Trimble from Fox Business here to talk a little bit about the biggest economic concerns from voters. Grady, how are you today?
I'm great, Chuck. I am driving to Grand Rapids, Michigan right now for the final Trump rally of the campaign cycle.
When are you expected to be there?
About 15 minutes.
There you go. Fantastic. Grady, what have we been seeing in terms of the big concerns from voters on this economy? Is it all inflation, or are there other ones that have been popping up as well?
I would say it's largely inflation-driven, whether we're talking about high prices at the grocery store, fuel prices, maybe not right now. They're relatively low compared to a couple of years ago. And then also housing costs have come up a lot when I've been talking to voters at early voting places over the last couple of days. But, yeah, everything seems to relate to higher prices because, as you know, when you look at the numbers, if you set aside the most recent jobs report last week, which was obviously abysmal, the economy is okay. GDP is growing. The rates, interest rates have been cut. But people still remember how high prices are compared to 4 years ago. And so that's what I'm hearing a lot from voters. But what's interesting is when you ask them, okay, so the economy is a top issue for you, whether it's number one issue, number two issue, number three issue, it usually falls somewhere in the top three. When you ask them which candidate they support, I've heard mixed answers to that question. A lot of voters say, well, life was better when former President Trump was in office, and so that's why I'm voting for him. Other voters that I've talked to who lean more Democratic say that they like a lot of Vice President Harris's policies. I talked to, for example, a first-time home, someone who's looking to buy a house for the first time and grow their family, and he was really drawn to Harris's $25K for a down payment for first-time home buyers. So it's kind of mixed, and it's really hard to say which way this particular state is going to go.
Grady, when listening to you talk there, it sounds like the main thing that most people still are upset about is it's not necessarily the rate of inflation right now, but more the price level. Hey, this stuff costs way more than 4 to 5 years ago. Is it a fair statement that there is no way for us to go back to the prices that we were seeing 4 years ago, absent economic calamity?
I guess that's the case, because the target inflation rate that the Fed looks for, obviously, as you know, is 2%. We're not that far off from 2%, but when you look at the, inflation compared to when the current administration took office, overall prices are up about 20%.
Right.
Now, I don't think the expectation is necessarily that prices will get back down, will drop 20%, because who knows what the heck that could look like. But I think what voters that I'm talking to, especially the ones that lean Republican, are saying is when former President Trump was in office, this whole conversation around inflation wasn't an issue. And I think, part of the reason they think that's the case is because there was a push for, especially here in Michigan, an important issue is, gas-powered cars versus electric cars.
Sure, yeah.
And, the message from from former President Trump himself and the Trump campaign of drill, baby, drill really resonates with them because when they hear that, they hear, okay, we're not, going to have only electric vehicles or majority electric vehicles in the next 5-10 years. And, when you look at the supply chain issues from 2021, 2022, those were largely driven by fuel costs. And when fuel went up, the cost of everything else went up. So that message really resonates with folks, even though this isn't, an oil and gas producing state like Pennsylvania, for example. It's still a message that resonates because not only do you have the auto industry issue that's important in Michigan, but you also have just the overall view that if you have more production of oil and gas, it generally leads to lower prices for everything across the board.
Grady, what about when we look at the labor market? Are you hearing any concerns about what's going on there simply because we have, again, I know there's been some weird data the last few months where it was looking a little bit stronger, and then this last month was kind of a disaster, though washed out by a couple hurricanes. Is there any concern about the overall trend in the last year in the labor market from voters saying, hey, it's become harder to find a job, and that's something that I'm really concerned about?
That's not something that I've really heard from the folks that I've talked to. I think what's so fascinating about kind of the economic conversation, especially over the last year, because remember when Trump announced that he was running, it was the week after the midterms in 2022. Back then, prices were really high, and the rate of inflation was still really high month over month, and obviously year over year. And now I think the conversation with voters isn't so much, looking at jobs data or, I'm having a hard time finding a job. It's more, how I'm feeling about the economy and how these higher prices have sort of made people who have relatively high incomes feel that they don't have the purchasing power that they used to or the disposable income that they used to. I will say, though, sort of a unique issue here in Michigan is, like I mentioned, the transition to electric vehicles that the Biden-Harris administration has pushed for. And obviously, Harris has the endorsement of the United Auto Workers Union. But when you talk to a lot of rank-and-file members of the union, many of them say we're concerned about that. And to go back to your question about jobs, that's where the jobs conversation comes into play. It's the concern that electric vehicles take fewer workers to assemble. And so they're worried that if we do kind of force this transition to electric vehicles, especially when maybe mass adoption of them hasn't taken place yet, that could affect the economy, not just of those UAW members and auto workers specifically, but Michigan's entire economy is largely based on the auto industry. And so the concern over jobs is more like a future, a forward-looking concern than a present concern.
I know you mentioned one potential first-time home buyer that you chatted with, but clearly the price of housing has risen dramatically, especially when you look at it in terms of monthly payment on actual, the prices that you have to pay. What kind of sense do you get out there as far as how big of a concern housing costs are for people?
I think it's a huge concern. I talked to another person who said, I'm having to choose, do I pay my mortgage this month? Do I buy the groceries that I would typically buy? Do I pay my utility bills? So it's the combination of everything, all of the expenses that every single American has that they're looking at, and that's the concern. It's not necessarily housing costs only. It's housing costs are high, food prices are high, electricity bills are higher, especially in a state that gets cold, and same in your neck of the woods. So it's sort of the combination of all of these factors that's just making life feel so much more expensive than it used to be. And like I said, we're not talking about people lower on the income scale. These are people who have jobs where they feel like they should be able to have disposable income, and they don't necessarily feel that way.
Very good. Grady, appreciate you joining us today. Enjoy the rest of the day. Hope you get where you're going safely, and we will catch up with you soon.
Sounds good, Chuck. We're pulling off the highway now. Have a good one.
There you go. That's Grady Trimble from Fox Business talking about voters' biggest economic concerns.